So, hello and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. It's been a while since we've had a guest, hasn't it?
It has. It's been a few episodes at least anyway.
For sure. But this week we've got, this bi-weekly, as we've kind of dropped it, we've got Paul Morris. How are you doing, mate?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Not at all, mate. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Mm-hmm. So, we're going to talk about Angry Young Men, which is a movie that you've worked on. But, I mean, I read through your press pack and I think what jumped out to me...
By the way, easily the most detailed press pack we've ever got. So
Was
thank
it
you
good?
for that.
I was worried, man. It's my first time doing it, but I was like...
No. Usually we get like a slide with somebody's name and their email address on it, like a picture, and you're like, right, cool, we'll work that out for ourselves. But no, yours was like, here it is. Like,
Good.
Comprehensive, but see, to be honest, I was saying to Matt when we came in, see, considering what I read, it doesn't surprise me that it's...
oh aye, the
Quite
graft you've put
in-depth,
into
like-
this point is incredible, man.
Mhm.
We'll get to that obviously as we go, you know what I mean?
Thank you.
But like, what jumped out to me and what I'd want to start on really was just like the journey that you've went through sort of personally to get this fucking thing made, mate. Like, was it 2016 you started?
Nah, I started writing 2016. I made a short version of it. That was going to maybe be like a wee series or something, but then I thought I'd been making shorts and sketches for a wee while. I think it's like 2013. I've been making sketches with similar crowd, most of the same boys that are in the film. And I'd always thought about a feature, but I just thought like kind of technically there was a lot involved, so I probably wasn't confident there. But then 2016 started writing, says if you're going to do it now, and started writing through 2017. Then by middle of 2018, it was finished, and then started shooting from there. And then right up until I think the last scene we shot was middle of this year, and then that was it wrapped, and then been editing sort of ongoing since the start of the year as well. So it's been like 5 years all in. So it's been a long time.
It's a pure labour of love material, isn't it? Like, I mean, I was, when we spoke about it on the Twitter feed, my first, I've seen, obviously we've been following each other a while, both on sort of personal and sort of Rebel City accounts, and I was quite interested because, you know, I'd seen the artwork with the balaclavas, and, you know, there was quite a lot of buzz around, you know, a lot of the people that I follow, you know, just through the podcast and, you know, in a wider sort of Glasgow sense, felt like the trailer dropped and like everybody was like, look at this sort of thing. And I was kind of the same where, you know, looking at it, I was like, this is, it looks, when I was saying to him, I was like, something, it's like Mad Max for the schemes. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, this is interesting, man. Like, I'm really looking forward to getting into this. But 5 years to that point is like, must have taken a lot of fucking discipline, man.
It was, but it's one of those things, you know it's yourself, and it ends over a long time. I think it's not because to prove a point or anything, you're sort of chasing one thing and then you've invested so much that you're into it. So it's like you write the script and you've got a scene you like, so it's like keep pushing forward to make the rest of it good enough. And then when you're shooting as well, you've got this scene you like, and you're like, if I can get all this shot in a similar fashion, it's like, that's pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with that. So it's almost like that keeps spurring on the next thing. Because if you stand too far back, if I'd known 5 years would be involved, I'd be like, I don't know. It's a long journey that's ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was a wee guy, and my mum and that were going like a fun run. I think I was like 5 or something. I've never been athletic or sporty, but they're going a fun run. It's at Strathclyde Park, and I'm running up and I'm like hyped, and everyone would come around the corner, and you see the width of Strathclyde Park, and I was like, is that the full size? Are we running all that? And they said aye, and I just packed it in straight there and waited for them to come back. And I think that'd be the same thing if I'd known. Maybe not, but I just kind of thought, right, this will be good if we can get it done. I thought maybe shoot every weekend, and there's maybe like 20 scenes. If we could do that every weekend, on the weekend, we'll be fine, get it done in a year. But then I think I mentioned that in the press pack, it's like things come up, and trying to get availability for everyone as you'll get as well. It's trying to work your schedule around it. It just, it takes a lot, and then you're kind of hanging on to days. But then, like I said, you've got stuff that you do like, and that spurs on the next thing. So it was a big task, but it didn't feel like you were in it for 5 years at the time. You're just seeing the next step ahead of you, I think.
So do you think, like, because you get a lot of advice, or you hear a lot of advice with people that would be like, you need to plan everything. Everything needs to be quite meticulously planned if you're going to, like, for sure, I think in my mind, if I was like ambitious enough to be like, I'm going to make a movie, I'd be like, everything needs to be kind of planned out before I start. So do you think that would have put you off?
I think in terms of scheduling, I mean, if you had that planned, if you thought, if I don't have half the film in the can by 2019, if I thought like that, or maybe the end of 2018, then it's like, no, it's done because I'll never do it. If I thought like that, maybe, but in terms of planning, I think you do, especially when you're working people's time, because you might think it's the best case scenario because you're making it over 3 years, shooting over 3 years, so you've got all the time in the world to experiment. But really, you've got lots of time in between. But on the day, you've got very little time because people can give you an hour here, 2 hours here. You've got them in the morning, so you'd be better know what you want because you can't experiment. So I did have it all pretty well planned out, and it can hurt you as well because you might think, oh, that sounds poncy, but you want to do this in a wide shot, and if you go to close-ups, it's sort of cheap. But sometimes you just need to improvise and say, what can I get? And that's what kind of got to at one stage, because if you just held on to that original idea that everyone needs to be here, I need 10 people in every scene, then it still would be getting made just now. So you do need to adapt, but there was a lot of planning each day in terms of getting what we need and
it feels like there's quite a side, even though, as you're saying, you're pressed back, it is a relatively low budget movie in the grand scheme of things. Like, there does seem to be quite a sizable cast for what I've seen it so far. So, I mean, logistically, that must have been quite difficult at times, especially with the constraints that you've already worked with, you know what I mean?
I think so. I think it's having such a big core cast as well. There was some scenes, it was like 30 odd, like maybe 40 people in it. But then having core cast members in, like 10, all it takes is one person that puts a spanner in the works, and then you're having to rearrange the night before. But like I say, you get over it and you find a way to make it work. And I think that became part of the challenge, and I suppose that was a bit of growth and a bit of dropping the ego from my point of view. But then a nice challenge. It was like, so how do you make this interesting with less resources? You already thought you're working with limited resources, but how do you do it with even less, and how do you still make it engaging? So that became a bit of a challenge for myself. But it is what it is. You just need to take it on the chin. You can't start crying about, oh, but I wanted it this way, because it's like, it wasn't supposed to rain the day, but it is. You just get over it. Do you know what I mean?
It's Scotland, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like,
what can you do?
You're just going to need to roll with them sometimes.
Definitely.
Do you think that was there any sort of point where you kind of tried to make it perfect? Or, because it sounds to me like you've became comfortable with no being, like as perfect as what maybe the vision that you've got for it. Like you're saying, you get maybe like cost constraints or personnel, and you need to just try and make it work. So was that something that you had to sort of like work on? Because if I had a creative project like that, I'm terrible, mate. I would strangle the life out of it. I'd be like, it's not perfect. Like, let's keep doing this and let's keep doing that. But like, that's for my fault,
We've already had the conversation about this room before we started. So
exactly.
Everything's a process towards perfection with you, isn't it?
I think I was, in terms of what we needed, I knew what we needed because I sat with the script for so long. I knew what makes this scene good, what makes it stand out, and what makes it part of the bigger picture. So I knew the bare essentials, and I did work to get that. We did do take after take, and some days we didn't make the day. I think where the biggest sort of compromise, if you want, was how it was going to be shot and how you would run a set. It's like, obviously it's an amateur production, but how you would have people there. And for example, if we're shooting this way and you've got my shot here, maybe you wouldn't be here until the afternoon. I'd shoot you by yourself. Now that's terrible, and I wouldn't want to do that, but we had to at some time because some people could give me the morning, and then it's going to hold up another couple of months, and we're not going to shoot again. So I had to do that, and it was the odd time. But for scenes that I knew, right, there's a lot of movement in this, so you can't just, because you could shoot everyone in a close up in random days. Do you know what I mean? But that's not interesting visually and doesn't do anything. But so I knew here's where we need to like turn it on. But for certain dialogue scenes, that's where the compromise was. But in terms of the film and what I wanted out it, it's only got better since the script stage. It's better than what I thought I could shoot. So it's improved, if anything else.
I think as well, for the very little that I've seen it so far, that visual sort of striking element that you're talking about comes not just from, the artwork we were talking about to start with, but even as, looking through the shots of the trailer and stuff, like, it is quite a colourful thing, but I like the contrast that what I seen anyway was set against the backdrop of quite like drab schemes and stuff like that, but the actual characters and the way they were interacting there was a lot of colour, there was a lot of it was visually quite striking, a lot of what I'd seen it, but I think having it set against the backdrop of like the, housing schemes and stuff like that actually almost brings those characters and what they were doing kind of like out even more.
Yeah, that was intentional, because I'm forgetting if I put this in the pack or not, but we were speaking about, I was thinking to myself about before we were shooting it in terms of Scottish films and British films, and there's a tendency to think it's all kitchen sink, or it's all sort of like very, like he says, grey, and that's been done amazingly. Like Ratcatcher, you wouldn't call a kitchen sink, but it is quite bleak in terms of Sweet 16, Red Road. Now these films are like very poetic, so I wouldn't call them like, oh, they're boring and grey, but there was a I didn't want this to be seen as that, or seem like this is like the grim reality of living here. Do you know what I mean? Because I didn't think it was that. It was more about how it felt, and then heightening that and making it sort of operatic in its style. And that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. I understand that. Maybe people would want to see like, what is it, like use real names and use this and use proper, how would they dress? But I thought if anything's going to work in our favour, it's going to be how you use the camera. You've not got the highest end camera. So how do you use it for movement? How do you tell a story visually? And then what do you do with the little you've got? And I thought locations, that's the main thing. Like, because Hamilton, it's up high. You've got the tunnels, the forest, you've got a mixed terrain. So then how do you then make that, how do you bring it out? How do you make it special? How do you make it memorable?
I was guessing like sort of Lindsay and like Kirky and stuff, because when I'd seen the video, that's where my Mrs. family are from. I was like, do I recognise her? But then Hamilton makes obviously sort of perfect sense as well. You know what I mean? So they're all the same around, you know, these places sort of thing like.
Aye, that's it. The satellite towns, they kind of all look the same, don't they? Like all merge into one. So like, what did you use? What was the camera? Like, did you have one camera? Like, what was going on?
It was a Sony A7S Mark II, which, so it's not, I mean, it depends, obviously. In cameras, you'll know that's very, very cheap. But it was obviously, if you're not working with any sort of budget, it's like prices. So it was like, I think it was like $4,000 all in for the camera and the lens. And the benefits of it, that the reason I chose that camera was low light. It's great in low light. For what we were doing, I had a couple of night shoots. Also, the autofocus on that lens. So I was the one that was operating. If I wasn't in the scene, I was operating it. And usually you'd have a camera operator and a focus puller, but we didn't have that. So it's like, if you've got something that's good autofocus, then you can move. You don't need to worry about that. So it kind of worked that way. And then the Phantom 4 was the drone that we used. So they were the two cameras that we used. And that was it, really.
Right. And have you ever shot anything before this?
Yeah, I've shot like short film sketches, and I've done like corporate stuff, like property and like wee online ads and stuff like that. So I know my way about the camera, and I've had a camera before that. But when I was choosing to upgrade, I kind of had the film in mind, and that's why I chose it.
Aye, it's a good camera, to be fair, man. I sold one about 2 months ago. I just ended up going for camcorders because it was just too high, like too much going on for it to like shoot in a room. Didn't need that, do you know what I mean? But that's crazy, man. Like one Sony A7 II and a drone and shot a movie with it, man. That's fucking...
It's pretty impressive. And I say what I've seen is a good quality so far. And I mean, that's part of what drew me to it when I was, you know, scrolling through and seeing the trailer and was like, whoa. Because I think over the course of the couple of years or so, or more now that we've been doing this, we've spoke to the director of Connect, who's
Maz Edmonds,
sorry. Her name escaped me there. But it's no, you know, we bump into people writing books all the time. We bump into people creating music all the time. You know, we have a lot of sort of creatives on, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of people out there like trying this. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, was this just something that you were always going to do? Was it, the vision was to get a movie out and, you know, but you never thought about maybe adapting to like a book or a novel or any of these types of things along the way? Because it's quite an unusual, you know, thought process. Well, no thought process, but it's an unusual project for us to encounter. You know, somebody being like, I'm going out there and I'm making a movie. It's quite a bold step. You know what I mean? Like,
there's an Orson Welles quote, and it says, "A poet needs a pen, a painter needs a brush, and a filmmaker needs an army." And I think that kind of sums it up. And because there's so many moving pieces, and you do need a huge crew. But when I set out to make this, I kind of knew it's like the phrase, use the weapons at hand. So what do you have instead of saying we don't have this? We've got a camera. There's been films made on iPhones, like Tangerine was made on iPhone 5 or something. And fair enough, they had a crew and everything as well, and lights. That does make a big difference. But what's the purpose of making the film? I've been making shorts. And the thing with short films is like maybe 20, 30 years ago, when everyone was getting shot on film, a short film might be your ticket to get a feature or could launch your career. And it still does. Like Whiplash was a short. I think Damien Chazelle made a feature before the short of Whiplash. But
really?
I think he made like a sort of low budget one.
That's a phenomenal movie.
It's amazing. It's unreal. So that's like a calling card. But now, because digital technology, there are more people making shorts. So that maybe doesn't stand out as much back in the day when you had to get a camera and film because it was a lot harder to do. So I thought, what's big? What could you do that's sort of ambitious and would maybe stand out a bit? And I thought, make a feature, and I had ideas for it. and I was kind of confident in myself as a writer, and I thought I could do this if I just put the time in. So it was sort of just how do you become a filmmaker essentially. So I thought everyone says how do you do something by doing it, by practicing. So that was really the motivation for it.
I mean, everything about it that I've seen and heard so far, it just feels like a pure guerrilla operation, man. Like, and you know, see similarities in some regards with the content. I know, obviously, Angry Young Men is a wee bit more allegorical, a wee bit more metaphorical, and in some respects than maybe somebody like, you know, Graham Armstrong, where we're talking about the young team. There's maybe like a bit of crossover in terms of like gang culture and stuff like that. But what I'd see a lot is the crossover in like your approach to it, because when we spoke to Graham, he was selling cars, 95, was coming home, was grafting to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, all weekends. And then, you know, at the end of it, after 4, 5, 6 years, he had this wonderful book that he was able to go and take. And then when I see your story, I see quite a lot of similarities, because in terms of your journey through the sort of production, you know, I know you mentioned the cameras, you know, being like sort of 4 or so grand, but like, did I read that like you basically like punted your own car to afford it or something?
Well, that was later on to get the computer to edit it
Right.
on. So I thought it just kind of worked in well. The higher purchase was up and my Mac wasn't cutting it. So I just time to sell it, and that was it. But obviously I got another car and everything, but everyone was going into film basically, any kind of spare cash. I mean, I'm not like, I don't really spend my money much on anything else. So I thought everyone is going into that, you might as well give it a good punt. But when Graham was on here, it was really interesting. I was listening to that, and I did see a lot of similarities in terms of the mindset. And he's talked about, before he was writing, it's about going to war. He used that terminology, and I thought that does.
That explosion was extremely well timed for going to war, but no, that's just bonfire night.
But it did make a lot of sense, and he was getting yourself hyped up, and I definitely felt like that, and that's the kind of mindset, because I think, you know yourself, when you're creative and Scottish and all the rest of it, you don't really shout about what you're going to do, and you don't really push yourself forward. So if you do have a creative idea, then it helps to be like, right, no, attack it and get up and get it done. It's not about, oh, if an idea comes to me, it's like, no, military, get up. And I think I put that in the press pack. I was getting up in the morning just to give yourself a sort of psychological edge. And it was like, right, are you going to take this serious? It's like, well, take it serious. Here, you're going to do it from here to here, and it's going to get done.
I think I find people who get up early, well, like this guy who gets up at like 7 o'clock and goes to the gym before he goes to work. Like, that baffles me. But I think I was reading, you were talking like there was mornings where you're up and writing between like 4 and 8 in the morning, and then actually going to like a full day's work and coming back and, you know, working again when you come home. And like, that's a level of dedication that my brain just does not understand.
See, I'm not either, and I'm terrible in the mornings, but it was almost like that was there was such a draw for that. Do you mean there was a reason to do it? I wouldn't do it if it was just the case of get up just for the sake of saying I got up at this time. Because obviously there's a bragging right, saying look how serious I took it, but really it was because I was so desperate to get it done, and I was desperate, and I thought, how do I finish this? And that was the only way I could see. Like Mike Tyson spoke about, he get up at that time and went to run because like he knew no one else was doing it, and that's maybe sounds like a bit pretentious to say, or you might think a lot of yourself, but I think to help yourself, if you're sitting at the desk and you're stressing about it, and you've been writing for nights, and you're hitting a wall, then that wee change up can help your routine, and that's what had to be done.
I think it's about that dedication we were talking about beforehand, because you've obviously went into this huge project and then have got to a point where, you know, you've had to reassess, you know, your course of action, your approach and stuff like that to make this commitment, you know, a success on the other side. So I think that's a really important thing to actually highlight to people, is that if you're heading towards a goal, whether it be creative or otherwise, and you find that you're hitting that wall, maybe it is important to actually take that time to just reassess your approach and see if there's maybe another way that will help you sort of push forward. You know what I mean? Trial and error, it's, you know what I mean?
And also
really
there's no rule
thing.
book for it. Do you mean it's get there by any means necessary? Do you mean? So
Aye.
It doesn't, I don't know. I think that's one of maybe the stifling things about the academic route about taking maybe writing. I don't know, like for definite, I done a short college course. I didn't end up finishing it in writing, but it can change your motivation. I think if you do it because you want to get something made and you want to get out there, that changes it compared to if someone says, no, here's how you do it and here's the way, because then you're hitting your head against the wall saying, this method isn't working and this is the done way you do it. And that can, I think, just throw it out and just say, what's the bottom line here? Are you getting pages a day? Are you getting scenes a week? Are you getting that progress? And that's how that's your barometer, I think.
Aye, man, that's class. How do you keep yourself motivated for 5 years while you're doing that? Like, most people I talk to will just be like throwing the towel, especially when you're like having to build PCs or fucking learn how to edit on the fly and doing all these things. Like, basically just kind of doing it all yourself.
And this isn't that you just like directed a movie start to finish. This is that you edited a movie, you built your PC to like do that editing process. You know what I mean? Like you've I think what you were saying you scored the music and without any sort of musical sort of background. I mean, you've literally been, you know, all fingers in the pie sort of thing at all times. Like so, like there's got to have been times where you've needed to like dust off and sort of remotivate.
I think so. I'm trying to think the timeline. So I think writing wise, you had a few key scenes that came to mind, and that motivated you to get the other stuff done and fill in the gaps in the script. And then when it was shooting, it was like, so you've shot 3 scenes that you're really pleased with, and maybe you kind of post snippets out or you show people and that looks pretty good to me, and that's on the line. It's like, well, imagine if I could do this the way this has been done for the rest of the script.
Yep.
Then that's exciting. So it's just every step then spurs on the next thing. But I don't know. I think just the draw of what it could be and potentially. Do you mean if I don't know what the results will be, if it will lead to becoming a director. But that was the motivation. I thought if this was something, imagine you could show people this completed piece and what you think it could be. That was the motivation. But then there was also like lockdown in between. So that was difficult. We were rehearsing for like 3 months with the theatre school and we were ready to go because I think was the first lockdown here. Was it like March? Was it before Easter or
March
something?
20,
Wasn't it?
something like that.
Aye, 16th of March or something like that.
In
I
that
think so.
ballpark.
I think we were rehearsing right up until that point. We'd booked a school out to shoot in the Easter break, I think it was, and then it got pulled away.
Because
And
that's
then
going to be like the very start of the year where you can realistically get out and do like outside shoots and stuff like that because
it's bitter cold.
there's no way to trust the weather otherwise, is there?
No, and there's only certain times you can do that, but that was maybe a bit of a knock. But then what I did was like, well, how can you make the next stage better? And I just started like 4 films a day and just kept like try to expand your palette and try to expand what you knew about films and just try to immerse yourself. So then see when it comes time to shoot again and we can shoot, then it's like I've got like so much to draw on.
You seem to have like a definitely like a kind of silver lining attitude to it because we're asking questions about challenges and what you're talking to us here about is like successes and feeding off those, you know, individual steps being successful heading towards the other goal. And that's something that I've got to say I really appreciate because I'm the opposite of that. We discuss every week how cynical I'm.
Oh, really?
But I love seeing these things and like I probably think we maybe like we've danced around the movie a wee bit, but like what for the audience, like broad strokes, like what is the movie actually about?
So it's set in the fictional town of Moncton. It's a surreal coming of age film, and I would say it blends maybe the sort of typical pattern with like I wouldn't say high drama, but violence with big action set pieces, and maybe some sort of like parable about what it feels like to grow up in Scotland. That's I don't know, in terms of plot, I don't think it matters as much because I think you'll sit down and you'll watch it, but it focuses on one gang and another gang comes into town as they're a bit older, and it's sort of how they deal with that. And maybe people early on had plans of leaving the area. The town sort of got its grips on them, I think, when they get to that age. And I think it all came from sort of, I don't know how you felt about it when I was younger. Your sort of dream was like to leave and you think America's this great place and you think, oh, that's what it is. But then everyone I think feels like that. You sort of love and hate where you're from. And I think it was a combination of that and wanting to leave and how did I feel about it and try to work that out. So I suppose I don't know if that gives you any more impression, but I think the trailer gives you an idea in terms of tonally. It's a bit of a mix.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite strong and I think it moves well. So I think that's it.
I've got to say, it is you know, a quite a common feeling because I definitely remember growing up and having family in Canada. So you say America, but for me it was Canada that was the big sort of pipe dream way off in the distance. And then, as you say, you get jobs and you get birds and you have kids and, you know, those sort of roots that you were maybe wanting to avoid one day have, you know, sort of settled before you really had anything to sort of do about it. And I think that's, especially, you know, in sort of working class communities anyway, that's definitely something that I think would be quite a universal sort of concept and idea. So it's a good, I think, entry for people to engage with it.
I think also, I think it's a luxury to Sorry, I think it's a luxury to know or ask yourself, what do I want to do in my life? Because I think a lot of people, that's so far down the list. I think when you're growing up, if you've maybe got stuff going on at home, or you've got this chaotic environment, you're not thinking about what's your future going to be. You're kind of getting through day by day. So when people ask you, when you get to a point in your life, it's like you see people, it's I always knew I wanted to do this, and I always had this plan. But a lot of people, I can relate. You get to that stage, you're like, what have I been doing, man? Like, how did I get here, or how did this happen?
Yeah.
Like, how have I got all these things? Like, it's almost like you didn't have a decision. You didn't make a decision in your own journey. But I think you do just get caught up in the rhythm of it. And I'm very, like, I consider myself very lucky and fortunate. I'm happy with my life, but I can just see it, and you see people, and it's almost like they wouldn't have a valid answer. So they'll say, what did you want to be, and why didn't you stick at it? And you're like, because stuff happened to me. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's also that thing that it's probably silly for us to expect children to understand what they want to do the rest of their lives, and it's a weird.
Aye, man.
We ask that question of ourselves at, I think, the wrong time in life. You know what I mean? Like we're asked to plan out our ideas of life when we don't have the first clue about how life works. You know what I mean? Like,
No.
I think that's something that's quite interesting when you see like the difference in some of the age groups and the gangs that you've sort of touched on. There is obviously sort of quite young actors, who I'm assuming are the people with the dreams are maybe getting out one day. And again, there are clearly like older actors that I'm assuming are the ones that come in and you know, cause that sort of conflict and what else. So I think you'll be able to see that pretty easily in the movie, because you have that not just like ideological conflict, but actual, what I'm assuming will be at one point at least one or two physical conflicts as well. You know what I mean? Like,
But it's hard. That's one of the reasons I sort of stayed away from making it a autobiographical, or making it exactly how it was, because most people know this. Do you mean? And if you start telling it to them, and I start giving them like this message in a film, then they're like, okay, right, I get it. Just entertain me for 90 minutes. So I tried to get as far away from that as possible, even though that's sort of maybe the through line of the film. But
right.
It's like, how do you make it engaging, and how do you make it that's like, I don't know, maybe at the heart of it, without being like, do you know this, by the way? Do you know that this is what happens to you? And look what I know, look how wise I am. Because there's people who have seen it all. But I do think it's a valid point. Like I said, it's more about me working out and where I was at that stage in my life when I was writing it, and trying to work that out for myself. But who knows? The film is what it is, and it speaks for itself, I hope.
Have you always been like a creative
I
through
think
your life? Like, you always been like a creative type, and
I think
wanted
so.
to do something like this?
I think so. When I was younger, like my dad, like he was like a real like film buff, and go to Blockbuster, the library every weekend, and get a couple DVDs, couple VHS, and we'd always be watching stuff, but never with the intention like one day I'm going to be a director. It was never that. We'd make like videos with my pals on like old camcorders and video cameras on the phone when that came out. We always did that, but it was never something you consider. I think that's another thing about asking youngsters, like, what do they want to be? Because maybe someone said, here's a possible route, maybe you would consider it, but I mean, you weren't even aware of half the things that were possible. I mean, would you consider this? I mean, like stuff you can do when you're older and how you can enjoy your life. You wouldn't even think of that. You think,
don't
like,
even know the technology that's going to be like when we were at school, like in the 90s. Like, if somebody was like, you're going to be able to have like 3 cameras and on a budget,
your own
mics,
studio.
you would be like, no chance.
No.
Fucking no chance. And
Definitely.
and it's like you're saying, we have this really weird sort of structure where we're telling 14 and 15-year-olds to pick. Because like, even when you look at the way that they make you pick your subjects, you're either creative or you're no. You have this very limited amount of time for creativity, and then the rest of it's all kind of like, you must do maths and English and the rest of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you don't even, I don't know, I kind of felt back then that the creative choices were kind of like, you don't really want to do them. You want to do the sciences, and you know what I mean? Prioritize these things, and if you get a wee creative outlet in there, that's good for you. Do you know what I mean?
It's like, that's good. Exactly, good for you in the sense that that'll maybe pass your time, son. But I remember that was the attitude. I remember going to like parents' night, and I think I wanted to do tech or something, like woodwork. And the science teacher was like, oh, to my mum, was like, oh, you know, we call that craft and daft, to say. And it's like, you're just like, fucking what chance you got? So I ended up doing like 3 sciences. And then by 4th year, I was just sick of school. And I had like, my only options were, I went to the careers advisor. I was like, do you want to work indoors or outdoors? They were saying. And then that's how they narrow it down. But I mean, not to get too heavy, but even if it's not a career point of view, but in terms of even just what's possible in your life, it was quite limited. And for all, like, social media might have obvious downfalls, that to see how people will spend their time and how they get enjoyment out of life, that could give somebody like a real lifeline when they're younger. So I do think that
definitely
when
makes
in a good
perfect
age,
sense if you're messing about with mates with camcorders and camera phones, that an adult in your life would have went, well, have you ever thought about studying film or whatever it is? And again, that option doesn't always necessarily seem to be there. But I don't think the infrastructure is either as well with some of the other creative outlets we talked about, where it be writing or music or dance or whatever it is. There seems to be clubs and communities where kids can join and learn guitar, or kids can join and do creative writing or whatever it is. Like, doesn't seem to have the same infrastructure around like filmmaking and stuff like that. Is that, do you think that's just something that's specific to Scotland, or do you think maybe there's a more general thing where it is seen as prohibitive because of how much goes into it?
I think because it's so expensive, I think that's one of the main reasons you hear about filmmakers like Richard Linklater. He's from Austin. I think that's quite a thriving like hip area now, but he said he felt as far away from Hollywood as anyone
Does
else.
he felt did like Boyhood and stuff like that?
Yep, that's right. And like Dazed and Confused. And
Aye.
he's like a brilliant director, but he felt so far removed. And he's living in America, but do you think he's probably like stays next door when you're a young guy? He stays next door to celebrities because he stays in America, but it's so vast that I think it is more maybe class than it is national. And I think that there's certain places, I think like Russia they've got like financing from the government into films, and France I think are the same. They get proper financing, but so they produce artists. But if you're to do that here, it'd be like, what, so we're going to pay X amount of your tax money so you can prance about and pretend to be somebody else? That'd be the attitude. And how do you justify it? How much did it make last year? How much did it make the year before? If you can't give a profit, then they're like, why are we paying? Do you mean that's even though long term you need to
There's
invest?
no art for the sake of art in that respect in this particular industry.
But then you want to claim your artists when they do well and they do make money. Do you mean you want to claim Nolan and David Lean and all these people and say best of British, but you do need to invest in it? And I just don't think, and obviously we've got a smaller population, but I don't know. I mean, I think if you just had more people getting into it, and I think now, especially with the phones and everything and what you can do with a phone, hopefully there will be more people doing it, because it isn't as expensive as it once was. But it's hard as well, because then as resources become more available, the less people start doing it. You maybe would have thought back in the day when cameras were so expensive and so heavy that as soon as everyone gets a camera phone, we're going to have like 10 Tarkovskis or 10 Orson Welles kicking about, like every generation. But as more stuff becomes available, then it's like there's more choice. So like people become more apathetic, I think. They're just like, oh, fuck, I could do that, but this looks interesting, but then I could do that as well.
Everybody's got a camera or dancing in front of it or miming. Like, but I don't want to sound like an old man, right? But it really perplexes me how this trend of playing a song and lip syncing to it on your camera has become so popular. I mean, people have become millionaires through doing this well. How do you do it? I don't even know what's going on, but you're right. It's like the internet and technology is seen as this bastion of like freedom, and we'll get all these amazing things, and it's like we're kind of, I don't know, man. All the shit seems to be coming out. Like,
and people still areas that are quite prohibitive and quite exclusive, and I think the film industry is probably one of them at least.
I think so.
You know what I mean,
I think I do just think that you're so spoiled for choice. It's like, why would you spend a day writing? Like, it can be so tedious. Like, why would you do that when it's like I can see all these beautiful people dancing about? I'm like, oh, but this is like constant dopamine. It's like, why would I spend that time there? It's like, why would you?
The technology
I get that.
That's actually meant to free us has like distracted us for these things
for
that
sure,
we might have otherwise explored.
When I'm editing, like, mate, it's just my phone's just like going, hello. Like, see when I bounce a video and it comes up like 10 minutes to bounce at a Premiere Pro and pure 10 minutes on my phone.
I know.
And then sometimes you're there 25 minutes and it's bounced and you're like, oh, fuck, what was I even doing?
I know.
But it interrupts the flow of work so badly, because see, if you don't do that and actually move on to doing another task, you keep that momentum moving a day in the work. See, when you remove yourself for 10 minutes, you kind of like go cold. It's like it's like a muscle. Like you cool down and then you go back to it and you need to warm back up to it, man. I find it ridiculous. See, sometimes if I've got a big edit on, like doing stand-up comedy or something like that, I don't even bring my phone into the room.
No,
I can't have it there, man. Like, it's just so distracting.
So much lost time as well. What do you gain for it as well? It's like, if you have to say to yourself, what did you get out of that? You're like, oh, I don't know.
So one of the things you were saying in terms of like your cast was that there was a number of people that you'd worked with previously, had like long-standing relationships with. Like, before it all kicked off, was the vision for the movie something that you had sort of shared with them and they were sort of buying into, or was it again about like available resources?
I think they're so good for giving up their time, but to give them, like, it was quite a long script. A few of them did read it, but for them they were just turning up and saying like, what do you need from me, basically, and they were really good. But I think at the other end of that, I think I mentioned that in the press kit, it was like the initial excitement or the initial sort of like goodwill of helping me out massively maybe wore off, but it was so many early mornings. It was like, is this still going on? Because they didn't know like what I had in my head and like what do
Right.
we need for this day. So I did. I think some of them did have an idea. I kind of gave them wee snippets, but they weren't that interested. They were just being good friends to me and helping me out. And some people, like people that were like actors who I'd met or like got in contact with, were quite excited about it because they did read the full script. But no, a lot of them were just giving their time to me, and I was trying to keep them engaged, but didn't do a very good job a lot of the time. No craft services or anything like that.
No, not getting the 5-star treatment,
No.
unfortunately, and a underpass tunnel in Hamilton.
No.
No, maybe they should have set their expectations a bit better, but aye, whatever. But I know, fair enough.
Do you think that some of the, because I think Matt was saying like, Paul Doc's in it.
Aye,
Is
he's
that
in it.
right?
Aye,
Do you think some of the sort of social media things will help you sort of promote it? Like these people have got so much pull now, like
know.
TikTok and these. We're just sort of slagging it there, but it's gave ordinary people such a huge platform to help promote. So if somebody like him's tagged onto it, then you get an audience. It's
definitely
kind of crazy, isn't it?
And I think it's also having that connection with people and who you can maybe get it in front of and who can see it. But it's great having that, and I think it's a great tool if you've got, because I know he does a lot of writing and he films a lot of his comedy and stuff like that. So it's like for him, it's like the more he gets, the more he can show, and the bigger his audience gets. So it's
Yeah.
amazing. So having something like that is great, and I think that's where traditional marketing in terms of print and all that, you're not doing that. It's all social media.
Yeah.
So you just take whatever you can get, really.
Aye, for sure. Fucking shite podcast question, but what was your favourite movies growing up? I mean, if your dad was a film buff.
The ones that stood out to me, I remember
I actually
seeing.
thought about that like 10 minutes ago and went, no.
Don't ask it.
The ones I
like,
remember
"Oh, I
seeing.
know."
I remember getting this really old copy of Apocalypse Now, and I didn't get it really, but I remember watching it. And my dad been like, "Oh, that Marlon Brando and all that, and all this trippy colours, and like it was really overwhelming." And the things that stand out at the end is see when they kill the cow or they kill the bull, and it just you see it slicing through, and then it ends. And I'm sure they've because originally
they took it out.
well, do you know there's been 3 versions of Apocalypse Now. There's Apocalypse Now Redux, and the final cut just came out like 2 years ago. And I'm listening to the commentaries and read everything about it, and I remember him saying that, see the big building where Brando is, they'd rigged that to explode, but that kind of goes against the script because Willard calls off the air raid. So originally over the end credits, it was blown up and it was this big spectacle, but Coppola says take it out because that doesn't go against, because he left it basically. He like just killed him, that was it.
Yeah.
I'm sure I remember, unless I'm imagining it, that I seen the explosion and it was just really quiet. And then the credits were rolling. All you heard was like next on BBC Two, and like, oh, it's fucking pure traumatic. But I remember that. Trying to think what else I watched. Big Lebowski.
Oh yes, man, what a movie!
It's like my favourite movie of all time.
It's insane. Like,
So it is like, it's like almost the perfect movie as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Like soundtrack,
Unreal.
acting, the direction, just everything about it. He's smiling because I'll sit here and talk all day about the Big Lebowski. So
It's
I'm
amazing,
I
man.
won't, but I could. You know what I mean?
that was definitely one of them. And Oh Brother Where Art Thou was an our Coen Brothers we had, and also Royal Tenenbaums. That was one we had.
Oh, brilliant, mate.
Brilliant movie.
So it was like, but he was good. Like my dad, he
Quite
didn't
quirky, quite quirky taste.
definitely, but he was good because he wouldn't say, right, you need to watch this and give us something highbrow. He sort of always knew how to gauge our attention span and the age we were at with what else we'd be watching. But and then that, and it was like Rocky IV and just anything like Shawshank.
Do you
all
think
these
that
films.
Rocky IV is like the worst good movie? Like if you were to actually like objectively just watch Rocky IV, you would be like, that's such a pile of shit. Like
Aye.
there's like so many there's like 3 montages. Like
Some of them are like
they
10 minutes
milk
long.
it, man. The bit in the Lamborghini's ridiculous. I mean, it's literally like him and lights flashing past his head, but you get
Is that
so
no easy way out?
Aye.
Fucking amazing.
But he's
man.
just
It's all
driving,
so class.
just goes and drives a motor. But it's such a strange movie, but so good, man. And everybody that you talk to, for like that generation, like the sort of 90s, 80s, sort of, they're like,
And you
Rocky
forget
IV,
that the
what a
first two,
movie.
you forget that the first 2 Rocky movies were like in the mix for Oscars and stuff
Aye,
like that. By
like
the time you
pieces
get
of
to
art.
4,
Aye. And people were calling him the next Brando. Like critics were saying that because he was so
Aye.
nuanced and it was such a great film. But then it's just pure pleasure. It's pure visceral. Like,
Pure American dopamine, like just right in front of you.
and you're seeing like James Brown's coming down and like bobbing the head, and like I remember like seeing Drago, and like I think there was a quote And Stallone was like, right, I don't want to look like a boxer. I want to look like a bodybuilder. I want this to be like the most heightened version of like the film. And you see them, they're all diced and they're training in the woods and they're training run up the hill. And I remember seeing it like afterwards, like getting my brother to put his hands on my feet and doing sit-ups and all that. Just this wee guy. And he's just, you got you charged up. And there's a lot to be said for that.
I think that's the thing with Rocky 4 when you say if you were to watch it now objectively, you'd be like, this is not the best movie ever. But I think it's because the first time we watched it, we weren't able to watch it objectively because as a kid, you're just drawn into the pure, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to just circle back to when you're talking about things like Tenenbaums, like Big Lebowski and stuff like that. We've obviously mentioned previously, you know, that kind of like surreal edge that you want to have for like angry young men. Do you think growing up being fans of these kind of like quirky, almost kind of like surrealist movies has brought that to your work?
Aye, definitely. I think you wouldn't make a film if you'd never seen one. Do you mean? So you can't help but draw upon it. You're not trying to steal stuff, but I think definitely having that sort of not taking the beaten path or not taking the obvious choice or just having the sort of slightly offbeat, dark but funny and the mixture of tone, I think, as well. Because I mean, Tenenbaums has got a suicide scene. It's got some of the funniest one-liners ever. It's like romantic. It's got beautiful slow motion. It's in the same way
like Life Aquatic and Budapest Hotel and all these types of things.
Amazing.
They're also like visually quite.
Wes Anderson.
It's got the new one as well, isn't it? What is it? Something Paris or something?
The French Dispatch.
Aye. So his are always quite visually striking as well. You know what I mean? Like, so that's pretty cool that you're quoting them as, you know, influences after having that chat with us, because you can actually like draw the line to the, you know, the influence that's then had on your work as well, which I think is quite cool. Like, I know when people talk about, you know, their work, they want to like talk about how original and unique and all these things are, but I think everybody's influenced when it comes to the art and their creativity. And I think like being able to like acknowledge and recognize where those come from is something that makes like good artists even better. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm glad that when we're talking about it, that's the kind of like lines that you're drawing, because they make like perfect sense in terms of the conversation that we're having.
Has there ever been a Scottish movie like that, do you think?
It's sort of quirk.
Like sort of surreal. And
Lynn Ramsey's probably she's like the most poetic, I would say, like Scottish filmmaker, someone who pushes like, have you seen Ratcatcher? No.
I've not seen Ratcatcher, no.
I've not seen it either. I've heard about it though.
It's really good. It's set like during a binge strike in Glasgow.
Stephen Purdon that's in it. Is he in Ratcatcher?
Pardon? I'm not sure.
Shell Suit Bob?
No, it might. I mean, maybe he is, but it was a good few years ago. It was like 90s, but it has a scene where like, so it's set in the binge strike, and it has this scene where a wee boy's got a pet rat, and all these boys want to bring it down that are bullying him, and the wee boy's like quite simple, and he takes his birthday balloon and he ties it to the rat and lets it float off, and then it cuts the rat in outer space, landing on the moon. So it's like, it's surreal, but even though it's like this really dark and realistic version of Glasgow, it's done in such a beautiful way. So there are, like, she's probably the kind of most like cinematic Scottish director.
Shallow Grave had a bit of a like comedic sort of dark edge to it, even though it wasn't necessarily kind of like surrealist in a lot of places.
No, definitely. Danny Boyle,
had that
100%.
kind of like humour to it, even if that's the right way to describe it, sort of thing. So in terms of like your influences and like, you know, stuff that got you here, you were mentioning in the press pack following or at least trying to follow a similar path to guys like Peter Jackson, who what was his one? It was
Bad Taste.
Bad Taste was again his own sort of independent sort of labour of love work that then launched just an absolutely insane career. And there was somebody else you mentioned that also was like, oh, I have seen that as well. But I can't remember. But it was a similar thing. There was somebody else who had again.
Christopher Nolan, no.
I think it might have been
Following he made.
Aye, possibly.
Linklater made Slacker. I'm trying to think of the other examples.
I think it was Linklater that you gave them the example. It's like these are two like huge, worldwide, world-renowned artists, Oscars and all, you know, nominations and all sorts that have went through this sort of journey that you're hopefully going to, you know, follow in their footsteps, sort of thing. Like, but I don't know. Is that like a kind of like tried and tested method to like break into the industry? Is that what a lot of directors do? Is start with like, you know, passion projects that are about their interests and their wants that then break them in, or is it more traditionally like an academic route that you were talking about where people study and go for there? I
think it can be anyone, and that's mainly kind of what I was saying about academics in terms of it gets you locked into a certain way you need to do things, but there's been all sorts, like I think you basically take however you can get it. So I think Tarantino for Reservoir Dogs, he'd made a feature film on his own called my best friend's birthday. I think there's snippets of it on YouTube. Made it all himself in like 8mm black and white.
Right.
But then he says like he spent like 3 years on it every weekend on film, renting a camera, working with actors. And he said by the end of 3 years he wanted to cry because it was a piece of shit. He said, and he hated it. And he says, well, what am I going to do? So he wrote another script, and he basically had Reservoir Dogs ready to go in a similar fashion. He went like that. I'm just going to make this myself because I'm sick of sending my stuff. He had already wrote True Romance, sent it out, got nothing back. He's like, I'm sick of this. I'm just going to make it myself. And his mate Lawrence Bender, who's a producer, was like, no, this is a great script. Let me shop it about. So he eventually got financing from it. But he would have went out and made it himself. So I think if you want to make the film, how are you going to get it done? If you can get financing, that's amazing. If not, then how else are you going to do it? So Christopher Nolan, he shot it over weekends, black and white, used available light, all these things. And Peter Jackson, I think it's all about, like, what can you do with it? Do you know what I mean? Like, don't try and make a Hollywood, don't try and play their game. Like, how do you maximize it? Like I says, camera movement. If you can't get polished visuals, if you can't get great lighting, then just do something else. So don't just sit and mope and say, if I had the money, I would have done this. Because when they're sitting in the cinema watching it, nobody gives a fuck. You can't give them a caveat before the film.
Aye. They're going to engage with it and get into that escapism, or they'll know.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Aye. What about Kevin Smith? Do you like Kevin Smith? I mean, what did he make? Clerks and Overnight and
that's right
on
enough,
credit
actually.
cards or whatever.
No.
Like
that was, I mean, I think he said he was inspired by Slackers, and I think I'm not like a huge fan of his other films, but I think the act of what he did was like very impressive. And he said like, look, I'm great at dialogue. I could do that. I could write patter between these guys and just set a camera up and what do we have? So that was definitely an inspiration, the act of it.
Aye, that's cool, man. Because it's kind of like I look at these types of things like we'll talk about like Graham and a lot of the sort of emerging Scottish sort of talent in the creative industries. It's very punk. It's all very like, and I think this is something that we'll see more and more of, because as we're talking about like the accessibility, but it's not even just the accessibility. Like hearing that you like put a PC together using YouTube tutorials, like you couldn't do that 10 or like 20 years ago.
Peter Jackson didn't have to do that, I don't imagine.
No, he was making like masks in his mum's oven and all that, and like he was like he was making. See, when I think about what he did for Bad Taste, it doesn't get spoke about enough. Like he was building like cranes for his camera at Timber. Like, he built Steadicams, and he was over in New Zealand. Like he was just doing this because he was a genius when it came to like miniatures and all that. But I think you're right in terms of it being like punk. And I think about, there's been certain trends in film. So they talk, I don't know if you heard like Heaven's Gate. Have you heard of that film? And it's like, everyone says it's like the notorious film that ended like the auteur era in Hollywood, because it was this huge, expensive film that over budget, and they were listening to this great director, and studios were like, nah, fuck that. You're not getting that budget anymore, and we're going to clamp down. And then you got like all these action films. When you look at like today's period and you think like, what's the most popular films of the day? Like the Marvel and the sort of superhero films, and not to shit on them, because I know people like love them, and like if people have an appetite for them, fair play. But maybe what you're getting on the other side is maybe people will be drawn to sort of, maybe you're not going to get £10 million, do you mean? But you're going to get this like raw story. You're going to get these individual voices coming through again. Maybe you're going to get this renaissance of independent cinema, but you just don't know.
As like a reaction to the homogeny of like 19 Captain America movies. I like some of them as well. So again, no to shit on them. Like,
aye, but it's
their reaction to,
they're kind of like the prog rock like movies, aren't they? They're like
the sort of blandness of the mainstream has got to be counteracted by the sort of punkiness of other artists who are like, nah, that's not for me, respect it, but here's what I'm doing, sort of thing.
Did you ever consider TV? Because like that renaissance that you're talking about, or that's kind of like mentioned there, like it's kind of happened in TV, hasn't it? Like they've kind of went away from like these big, huge movie productions and starting to plough the money into like more like artistic, you know, like longer form, and I think that there's been many examples of how that's been amazing.
I mean, like 15 years ago, you would not have got Hollywood actors in like TV shows to the extent that, you know, Nicole Kidman's doing, you know, whatever it is with Reese Witherspoon. Like they're two massive Hollywood actresses working on like a BBC project, the Lakes thing with the lassie that's in Handmaid's Tale and all. And you're like, 10, 15 years ago, that level of like talent wouldn't be available in a sort of TV sense.
I think they can be great. I think the biggest problem with TV, like if money's coming in, then there's going to be a lot of stuff made, and they're going to say, right, we want the next big hit. The problem with TV is like, sometimes it's just a great hook and they get a great first season, a great first episode, and they're like, can you keep it going? And it doesn't go anywhere. That's my only problem. I love like TV and love like the great series, like the same as everyone else. But I think for me, I did do a bit of TV. I did like work experience for the BBC for a bit, and in Glasgow, and then I was part of like a scheme called The Network, and that was in 2016. It was quite prestigious, like all over the UK, and it's like 50 people chosen out of 1,000 applicants. So I was like, oh, this is great. Maybe this will lead to work up in the BBC. But even after doing a month's work experience for obviously for no money, and then doing The Network, I was seeing people down south all getting jobs at the back of it, and I still couldn't get in like the runners pool. That's not even like a runner's job. And I thought, what's going on? Like, there's just so few resources. And I think that was part of the reason I made the film, because it's like, this TV avenue isn't going to work. Like, because what they say to me, they give you like a meeting on your last day. It's like a kind of careers advice, and they're like, what do you want to do? And I was like, write and direct. And it's like, well, you need to write and direct. That's pretty much what she said. And I don't think it was brutal. I think she was just being honest. Like, there's no apprenticeship for that here. You don't come in and say you're going to direct the next River City or anything if that's what you wanted to do. But the big question when I went to The Network, all these CV clinics they do was like, are you willing to move? Are you willing to move? And I think there are more resources down south. But I think even if you did want to start in TV, I know people that are doing it and maybe doing researcher's job, but for me, that just wasn't the avenue, and I chose filmmaking.
Yeah. I know a girl who did the film and TV study and did really well, and I think left for London to go and, I think it was in the X Factor or one of these that she was involved in, and she thought she was going down for like a job and like spent 6 weeks like running about fetching coffees and was just like, no, straight back up the road.
Jeez.
So it's definitely like a big commitment to make that sort of change in life. And then if you get down there or anywhere that you happen to, whether it be somebody moving to LA or New York or whatever kind of hub for like this type of industry, like you've got to then, sorry, it's fireworks. You've got to then understand that it still might not work out. You know, moving isn't necessarily a guarantee of any success when you make that. So I can get why somebody would then be like, no, do you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to do it myself.
And I think also it's like, what do you want? I think, are you just doing it for a job because you like the industry? Because a lot of people in these courses, like my mate was in one, he's like a real film buff. It's a film and TV course, but none of them are like well versed in like film or telly. Fair enough. But I think they just like the sound of it. They like TV, so maybe could get a job in it. Maybe that flies elsewhere, but up here it's like, I don't know what you need to do to get in and get a paid work, and it's like so sought after.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you need to ask yourself, what do I want? Do I want to be a camera operator? Do I want to be a director? Like I said, a writer-director? And it's like, what do you need to do to get there?
It's crazy that those opportunities are not here in Glasgow when like a mile and a half that way we've got the BBC building and like the Channel 4, and, you know, a mile and a half that way we've got the STV building and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Quite
like,
a lot that they lean heavily on sort of creatives and shots, and like they do sort of want people to do quite a lot of stuff for free, and that sort of like shooting and writing, we'll put it out on our platforms. I think there's
Exposure.
well, I hate that. See, when it's like, oh, it'll be good exposure for you, you're like, what doesn't exposure doesn't fucking put food in my belly, you know what I mean?
I'm being
Like,
exposed by like producing and presenting your content, whereas actually now you've put yourself in a position where, as you say, you've clearly feel like you've got something to say that's not just about, I just want to be in the industry, as you were saying. You clearly have like something that you want to say in your work, and the best way to do that is off your own back.
I think so. I think one of the problems up here as well, it's the same with film. They'll say X amount was spent, and so we're investing X amount in TV up here, we're investing X amount in film. But then what that equals is they don't leave anything behind. So maybe they're going to film like Eggheads up here and they'll rent a studio, but all they're doing is renting space. They're not like doing apprenticeships. They're not like saying, right, so then you need to have like, and it's the same if they build a studio. I think there's talks say like Glasgow or Edinburgh, they're going to build a studio. But that doesn't mean anything if it's just a space for people to rent and get tax breaks. If like Avengers come here and you maybe get maybe like catering will get some done off it.
Yep.
And you can say, look how well film's doing. But you can't lay claim to that unless you're generating jobs, or you can get some. And I don't know how I'm saying that as if I could put the world to right, but unless you're saying, right, you now can teach them and you can then bring it on and there's structure involved, unless you're saying here's how people can, like I said, pay their bills. But it seems to be either get paid a lot to do something that's really, really like a very niche thing in TV or film, or you're not getting there at all. You're going to be like starving. You might not even get there.
Indiana Jones came, 6-8 weeks ago, and the city council get a pretty hefty bump, I'm sure, and same as Batman and all these things and the future productions. But did these events, did these productions have like lasting, meaningful impact on the people in this country who work in that profession? I don't know that it did. You know what I mean?
I don't think so. And like from what I've seen in film, it's like, just to say you come up here and they got X amount, like I said with Avengers. But I mean, you need to be. I mean, and to be fair, I think one of the Russo brothers is like starting a St Andrews Film Festival because like his daughter went to school there. That could be something. I mean, what do you do? Do you come and say there's so much money would need to be done to give people regular work, and then how is it even done? Like how do you do it?
Yeah.
Do you give like they don't have the capacity to be teaching someone as they're shooting a feature film? Do you mean they don't have that? But also to come here and just rent a space, like I said, it seems to be like the French have got a great model for it because they seem to put consistent money into it. And it's more like a government scheme and they bring great artists and they have great directors.
Yeah.
But I think they understand that you just need to write that off and it is an investment, it is like public funding.
And they have worldwide renowned cinema as a result, probably.
Worship
you know what I
there,
mean?
do you mean
Like,
canned?
French cinema is, you know, probably one of the top 3 or 4 that you would mention if you were like name me worlds. You'd be like Hollywood, you know, Bollywood, France, you know,
100%.
maybe like Korea and stuff like that. Is, you know, that has evolved over the last sort of 10, 15 years, you know what I mean? Like, so like in terms of getting angry young men sort of moving, like with the types of constraints we're talking about in terms of, you know, access and whatever else, like did you ever try and like have it funded or any of these types of things? Did you run into issues or did you just make the decision like, and I'm probably going to anticipate your answer here because your answer to everyone's been, I just went and did it myself. But is that the case here as well, or was that something you explored?
No, I have, and the thing is, I've had knockbacks. I mean, I've had knockbacks for jobs and tried to get into TV and trying to do like funding jobs. But my outlook and the reason it was a feature and not a short was, so say you get like a short film scheme in Scotland. So you get your idea together and you pitch it to them or you send them the email. Then you wait maybe 2-3 months for a response. Then if you're lucky enough, you'll get shortlisted into maybe 20 applicants. Then you'll go through workshops in a few months. Then maybe out of that, 6 will get picked. If you're lucky and if you get to that stage, then it'll start to get made. Then you're sort of workshopping it again, getting a producer on board, and then you make your short. However long that takes, then you edit it, then you take it to the festival circuit. So you're already talking maybe like 2 years. See, when you put it like that, making a feature in the time it would make a short that you think is this manageable, doable thing in the typical funded way.
Yep.
It's not. I mean, it's not that much longer, and that was my mindset. That the time it'll take me to make a legit short, if I could even get in, which I don't think I would, that you just go and make the feature. But it all comes down to if this then yields a result. Because if it's all well and good saying I've done it myself, I did this, but see if it doesn't yield anything, it doesn't make some sort of progress, or that doesn't do the festivals, then you're sort of like, well, but fingers crossed it will. But the sort of funding route, I just thought I've done some applications, but you're gonna have to do this on your own and kind of show them, give them something, like give them a calling card if that's what it is. Maybe that's all it needs to be. Like, I can do this, I'm capable of doing it with no funds. Imagine what I could do with some funds.
Yeah.
Where do you get that sort of confidence to do that? Like that's not a normal thing in the west of Scotland to be like, do you know what? If I don't go through the normal path, I'll just date myself. I'll just like that's a lot of energy, you know what I mean, and real positive energy as well. But do you know what in your upbringing where that sort of comes from? Because that's got to be a huge part of the inspiration for you.
No, definitely. I think like I said, my dad was he was a really smart guy, and he was like showed me a lot of films, so I was always brought up around it and thought I didn't see it as like I'm Scottish and they're American. Do you know what I mean? I just thought, oh, these are films. As we all did, I'm sure. We're all kind of American and like Western culture. So, and then my mum was very, very supportive of everything I did. So I don't know, maybe I'm quite deluded in that sense. And I thought, why not? Do you know what I mean? So maybe that's why. But I also just think it's like desperation. Like I really like love it and I really want to be part of it. And it's like, how do I get there? So that's my driving force. I love like cinema. I want to be part of it.
And so like, just wrapping up, like what's the plan? Like what you going to do when you've went through all this and self-edited and self-composed and you've got like your baby?
Are you now self-promoting?
Well, I bet that.
You're your own publicist as well. Like,
just did a YouTube
I know
video.
Obviously in the press pack was we've sort of pointed back to a few times when you mentioned guys like Peter Jackson and that. I think the path that they had followed was that they did their own labour of projects and then I think they went to like film festivals and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that's going to be at least part of what you're going to try to do next.
That's the ideal scenario would be, I've submitted to Glasgow, the ideal would be you get a premiere in Glasgow in March when the film festival is, and then you hope that someone sees potential in what it is and offers to like collaborate or fund the next thing. So that's best case scenario. If it doesn't do the festivals, I'll put it online and I'll use it as like a calling card to hopefully get funding for the next thing. And then, but I'm praying for the festival, because to put it on in your hometown and get it in front of an audience, I think would be amazing. So fingers
This is
crossed.
what YouTube's like totally changing the game, because you've got guys like, if you look at, there's a couple of like American comedians, but there's one in particular, I think, is it Mark Normand, and that guy had been like on the cusp of a Netflix special like 5-6 times and it just got overlooked, and he was like, fuck it, do you know what, I'm just going to put it on YouTube, and it's at like 20 million views.
Really?
And he's made like 500 grand for it. So you're like, he's now going, right, now I will fund my next project with that. Like,
Yeah.
So YouTube's kind of changed the game.
He still
with that,
has
hasn't it?
options. You still have options to monetize the content. But I've got to be honest with you, I think I would love, for what I've seen of the movie so far and what I've heard, and just to speaking to yourself, and also just absolutely loving the GFT. I think I would really enjoy the opportunity to go and see the movie in that type of environment, especially given how local it is to, you know, that event. You know what I mean? So I wish you all the luck with that. And
Thank you.
You know, are there other film festivals in and around the country that you're going to maybe take a swing at as well? Is it just Glasgow you're concentrating on just now?
That's the main one just now. I think if it gets into there, then that'll be a good sort of barometer for how well we could do
And
elsewhere.
maybe dominoes start to fall at that point.
Hopefully, but my kind of mindset, which might be a limiting one, is like, if you can't make it in your hometown, then I mean, what chance you got? I think Glasgow needs to do Glasgow, I think, and because I think we could bring a great crowd there, and people who are maybe not art house cinema goers, they can come and enjoy it, maybe get a feel for the place. But I think that would be the dream.
Absolutely.
And what about that next project that you would hopefully get funding for? Is that in the pipeline? Do you know what that's going to be like?
Three or four. I've got 3 or 4 ideas, and then once I kind of get speaking to anyone, or if not, then I'll start developing it. But it will be the sort of next stage. The next stage will dictate the next steps, I think.
Aye.
Well, mate, it's been a pleasure.
It has.
Thank you. I've been brilliant,
Really
man.
been
Thanks
a
for
great
having me.
chat. Like, not at all, man. And welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
And we can do to help promote it or anything like that. Just let us know, man.
Aye, the free
Because
tickets will be appreciated.
genuinely
as well.
was like
Press.
genuinely was like watching the trailer, like pure. This is like something I've never seen before, particularly in like a Scottish context. And it was. I mean, I literally, when I emailed you like 30 seconds after watching the trailer,
brilliant, man.
and was like, "Dude, we've been following each other a while. I've just seen your trailer, like, and you come
Class,
sort of thing." It was that impactful to me, and then I was literally like, "Pure dude, check this guy's trailer out, by the way." You know what I mean?
Brilliant,
Like,
man.
within seconds. So I think there's definitely something there, man. And
Hopefully.
I really, really wish you all the best of luck with it.